My brother invited us over and reassured us that we wouldn't have to worry about paying for rent or utilities. Maya, I work in finance, and my husband, Charlie, is a car mechanic. We live in the house where I grew up, but not in the way you might think. My parents no longer live here. Our family home was actually a long-running business, once led by my father as the CEO. My brother was meant to take over the company, so he majored in economics and even studied abroad at Oxford University to further his business management skills. After returning to the U.S., he worked alongside our father for several years. When my parents decided to retire and move to a peaceful spot like Aspen, Colorado, they passed the family business to my brother, and in return, they gave me the house. I moved in with Charlie, and we settled into our new life. The house is perfectly located, with easy access to public transport just 5 minutes from the train station, and all essential services like hospitals and schools are nearby. It's a home that will serve us well when our kids eventually leave, so I'm thankful to my parents for this gift. We had plans to expand our family and live happily, but none of us anticipated the turn our life would take because of an unexpected event. After moving in, my mother-in-law began visiting us often. Knowing that my family runs a business, she would frequently ask questions about money. Since we married, she would often ask, "Maya, how much do your parents have? What will you inherit when they're gone?" These questions made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to sound rude, so I just answered, "I'm not sure. I've never really thought about it. I've already received the house, so I don't expect much else." Even though I responded casually, she continued, "That can't be right, can it? Your parents are getting older, and you never know what might happen. They must have talked to you about their assets." It became clear to me at that moment that she was hoping to rely on my parents' wealth. While I knew exactly what I'd receive, I decided not to share any details with her or with Charlie, who was so close to her. But then something truly shocking happened. One morning, without warning, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family showed up at our door. It was around 8 a.m., on a holiday when the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there were movers. "Why are the movers here?" I asked, confused. That's when my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family showed up with smiles on their faces. "We're moving in today, so please take care of us," they said. The moment I saw their grins, I felt a chill. Charlie woke up, and when I asked him to explain, he shrugged and said, "What's the big deal? The house is so spacious. There's plenty of room for everyone." He acted as though it was perfectly normal for them to move in. I was already taken aback by the idea of them living with us. But then my sister-in-law made an even more outrageous comment. "We were invited by your brother, Maya. Since he called us, we won't be paying any rent or utilities. We're relying on you, Maya." To make matters worse, my brother-in-law started opening rooms and claimed, "This room has great sunlight. Charlie, move everything out here into the hallway." I was dizzy from this situation. This was my house, yet they were moving through it as though they owned it. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law have always lacked consideration, especially my sister-in-law, who once went through my bag without asking. If this keeps going, they'll end up taking over my room. This is my home. Why are they acting like they own it? That's enough. I want them to leave. I'm generally calm and composed, but I couldn't stay silent while they treated the house like it was theirs. I lost my temper and shouted at all of them. That's when something truly unexpected happened. "How dare you speak to us like that? You should be the one leaving." At that moment, I felt a sharp sting across my cheek. Wait, did she just slap me? I stood there, stunned, still processing what had just happened. All I could feel was the searing pain in my cheek. Something inside me snapped. I can't live with people who would treat me this way, especially not in a house I inherited from my parents. I packed my things and decided to leave, planning to let my family know about the situation. I needed to get far away, so I rented an apartment for the time being, while figuring out how to manage my commute. When I called my parents, I could hear their anger even over the phone. My father, who has always been supportive and kind, especially to me and my brother, was furious. He's a tough businessman, but as a father, he's always been caring and quick to help when needed. I didn't want to drag my parents into this, especially since they were just settling into retirement, but I had no choice. My house was being taken from me. While I stayed in the rented apartment, I was sure my husband and his family were enjoying my house, so I decided to take the advice my father and brother gave me. A few days later, during a break at work, I checked my phone and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew exactly what he wanted. I had contacted the utility companies to cut off the water and electricity. Since the house runs entirely on electricity and doesn't have solar panels, there was no way to function without power, given the heat. It must have been uncomfortable without electricity or water. When my husband called again, I answered. What's going on? There's no electricity or water. You turned it off, didn't you? I could hear the panic in his voice. Of course, I had turned off the utilities. This house is mine, and since I'm not living there, I shouldn't be paying the bills. If they want utilities, they can pay for them themselves. Charlie was furious and demanded I renew the contracts immediately, but I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to pay for utilities just because they wanted to keep living there. They always act like they're entitled to my money, and I'm tired of it. If you don't like it, then leave, I said and hung up, since my break was ending. Later, I got calls from my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law, all demanding I restore the utilities. They complained about the heat and lack of water, but that wasn't my problem. After listening to their complaints, I told them to figure it out themselves and hung up. A week later, they still hadn't left, so I took further action. I consulted a lawyer from my father's company and had them send a legal notice to my husband. The notice warned him about trespassing and how they had unlawfully moved into my home and were taking advantage of it. I made it clear that I was considering legal action if they didn't leave. What's going on? Why did I receive this from a lawyer? My husband was clearly caught off guard, knowing how concerned they were about their public image. The prospect of a lawsuit was the last thing they wanted. They wanted to avoid the lawyer, but they didn't want to give up their free ride either. It seemed like they were trying to figure out how to persuade me to let them stay. I can easily read my husband's thoughts. It's almost as if I have control over his mind. However, there's no way I can entertain what he has to say, so I decided not to follow his instructions. That's when he lost his temper, forgetting where he was, and shouted at me, "Enough, are you getting too carried away? Just because we've been a bit shady doesn't mean you can act so superior. Go back to how things were and drop the lawyer." Despite his shouting, it didn't affect me in the slightest. In fact, I was more irritated by his call, thinking, who does he think he is, taking over someone else's house? No matter how much he yells, my stance won't change. If he stays where he doesn't belong, I'll take legal action. He should really think carefully before making any more moves. He kept yelling, but I didn't listen. I simply hung up. I had already discussed divorce with my lawyer, and this was a waste of time. When I returned home, I saw I had missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. I knew it was just about them trying to settle things, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more. I blocked their numbers to avoid further interruptions. Seeing how my prideful ex-in-laws were terrified of being sued, they packed up and left the house. The lawyer stepped in, and the divorce negotiations progressed smoothly. I also hired a cleaning service, and my home was finally spotless, free from my ex-husband's family. While renting a place was comfortable, there's nothing like having your own home. Though the house has some wear and tear, I'm thinking of renovating soon. I consulted my father, who recommended a reliable contractor, so I started the renovation process. Living alone is incredibly liberating. There's no one to answer to. I can relax on the couch without being scolded. I can eat whatever I want without hearing any complaints. Life was peaceful until I received a call from my ex-husband, 3 months after our divorce. At first, I didn't recognize the number and didn't answer, but after several attempts, I assumed it might be the contractor calling, so I reluctantly picked up. But as soon as I heard his voice, my mood soured. It was my ex-husband. We had divorced with the help of our lawyers, with a promise to never contact each other again, so I was confused as to why he was calling me. Changing his phone number just to reach me seemed odd. We had agreed not to speak again, so I didn't want to hear from him. I was about to hang up when he begged, "Please, just listen for a moment. I'm begging you." He continued speaking without my consent. Apparently, his company was facing serious financial problems, his salary was being cut, and his mother's health was deteriorating, leaving her unable to work. His sister and her husband couldn't contribute either, as he was unemployed, and she was juggling multiple part-time jobs, most of her earnings going toward paying off her brother's debts. They were in a desperate situation, and he was asking for help. After hearing this, I couldn't help but think, well, that's unfortunate, but it's not my problem. They had invaded my home without permission, done as they pleased, and tried to kick me out. I felt no sympathy for them. Even if he told me all of this, it didn't change anything. It's his family's issue, not mine. At my cold response, my ex-husband panicked. "Don't say that. We're in serious trouble. We can't even pay the rent or buy food tomorrow. We were once family, right? Please help us, he pleaded, nearly crying, but I wasn't moved. When I was in need, he did nothing to help me. He, along with my mother-in-law, always belittled me. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law had mocked me for being plain and old-fashioned. They even told me to stay away because my conservative ways were rubbing off on them, not caring about the hurt they caused. My mother-in-law didn't just make life difficult, she pushed me to have a baby immediately, forced me into bizarre health treatments, and made unnecessary doctor's appointments. She spread rumors about me being barren, telling all the neighbors. When I look back, there was not a single positive thing about my marriage. My ex-husband, once kind, turned into a puppet of his mother after our wedding. The first time my mother-in-law stormed into our house, I wasn't home due to an appointment. Apparently, she was upset about this and cried to my husband, saying, "I wanted to see Maya, but she wasn't there. I'm sad. I want to be friends with Maya." After hearing his mother cry, my ex-husband yelled at me without hearing my side. He claimed his mother wanted to get along, but all she ever did when we met was insult me. "My son seems to have lost weight lately. Is it because your cooking is so bad he can't eat properly?" She would say things like this, no matter where we were, making it impossible for us to get along. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law joined in, laughing at me. I can't help people like this anymore. No matter what they say, my feelings won't change. I've made up my mind, and I'm not helping. I hung up the phone and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, I figured he might change his number again and try to contact me, so I decided to change my phone number at the store that weekend. But before I could get that done, my ex-husband and his family took things into their own hands. They broke the lawyer's agreement and showed up at my house at 11 p.m. "Let us in. We're family. Help us." They banged on the door, yelling without concern for the time. "What's going on at this hour? Please leave. You're disturbing the neighbors." I went to open the door, and they tried to barge in. I considered speaking to them through the intercom, but they didn't care. They continued banging on the door. I was shocked by their behavior, and I was about to call the police when I heard sirens approaching. Apparently, a neighbor had called them. When they heard the police sirens, they panicked, thinking I had called the cops, and tried to flee. However, a crowd had gathered, and escape wasn't possible. The four of them were escorted to the police station, where I was questioned about the incident. I explained everything, and soon word spread about what had happened. Among the crowd, a co-worker of my ex-husband's was present. By the next day, everyone at his office knew what had occurred. He was already struggling with his pay cut, but after involving the police, his company didn't let it slide. He ended up getting fired and couldn't afford to pay for his apartment. The money problems caused a rift between him and his sister's family, and their living situation ended. Now, he's living in public housing with his mother, both working multiple part-time jobs to survive. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay stunned.